Have you ever had one of those days where nothing seems to go right? You wake up late, spill toothpaste on your shirt, miss the bus, and by the time you finally get your hands on a cup of coffee, you're one little comfort. The universe decides to play its cruelest joke yet? Well, that's exactly how this story begins. She bumps into a stranger at a cafe, spilling coffee across his suit. She thought she had just ruined an ordinary man's day, but she had no idea this man was worth millions, and her life would never be the same again. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. I'd love to know. And while you do that, let me take you to the moment everything changed for her. The moment she collided with him, coffee cup in hand, and fate decided to spill all over both their lives. Jessamine Pierce pressed her palm against the cool glass door of Brew and Bliss Cafe, watching the morning rush through tired eyes. Her reflection stared back, messy bun barely holding together, dark circles that no amount of concealer could hide, and that same worn uniform she'd been washing every other night for 3 months. "Another day, another dollar," she muttered, pushing inside. The familiar scent of roasted beans and vanilla syrup should have comforted her, but today it just reminded her of everything she couldn't afford. The cafe buzzed with the usual suspects: business executives barking orders into phones, college students hunched over laptops, and tourists snapping photos of their overpriced lattes. Jessamine navigated through the chaos with practiced ease, balancing a tray of steaming hot coffees like she'd been born to do it. "Bad luck follows me like rent bills," she thought, weaving between tables, "always showing up right when I think I'm finally getting ahead." Her bank account sat at a whopping $37. Rent was due in 5 days. The part-time janitor job at the community center barely covered groceries, and this waitressing gig? Well, it kept her from sleeping on her sister's couch permanently, but just barely. "Order up for table 12. Ambrose called from behind the counter, sliding another tray her way. Jessamine grabbed it without looking. 3 large coffees, 2 with extra shots, 1 black. The businessman at table 12 had been particularly demanding today, snapping his fingers like she was some kind of servant. "Rich people," she rolled her eyes, "think the whole world exists just to make their lives easier." She was halfway across the cafe when it happened. One second she was walking normally. The next second her worn sneaker caught on absolutely nothing. Maybe a wet spot, maybe just her own exhaustion. And suddenly she was stumbling forward, the tray tilting in her hands. Time seemed to slow down, the way it does right before disaster strikes. She watched helplessly as gravity took over, sending 3 cups of scalding hot coffee flying through the air in a perfect arc of destruction. And standing directly in that arc was the most intimidatingly gorgeous man she'd ever seen. He was tall, probably 6 foot something, with dark hair perfectly styled in that expensive way that screamed, "I have a personal stylist." His suit was gray and fit him like it had been sewn onto his body by Italian angels. Everything about him radiated wealth and power, from his polished leather shoes to the watch on his wrist. The coffee hit him square in the chest. The entire cafe went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every phone call paused. Even the espresso machine seemed to hold its breath. Jessamine watched in horror as dark liquid spread across the front of his perfect suit, staining the expensive fabric in ugly brown splotches. Steam rose from the wet spots, and she realized with growing panic that the coffee had been really, really hot. "Oh my God!" she gasped, dropping the empty tray with a clatter. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. The man's eyes, gray like storm clouds, locked onto hers. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see a muscle jumping in his cheek. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but she could hear the fury simmering just beneath the surface. "Do you know what you've just done?" The way he said it made her stomach drop. Not, "Are you okay?" or "Accidents happen." Just cold, measured anger that made her feel about 2 inches tall. But here's the thing about Jessamine Pierce. She'd been knocked down by life so many times that somewhere along the way, she'd stopped apologizing for taking up space. "Yeah," she shot back, crossing her arms despite the fact that she was clearly in the wrong. "Ruined my last cup of caffeine. You'll live." A collective gasp rippled through the cafe. A woman at a nearby table actually covered her mouth in shock. The businessman at table 12 looked like he was watching a train wreck in slow motion. The stranger stared at her for a long moment, his storm gray eyes searching her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Up close, she could see he had the kind of sharp features that belonged on magazine covers. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that were probably illegal in several states. Focus, Jessamine. You just destroyed his outfit, not his face. Do you have any idea, he said, his voice dropping even lower, how much this suit cost? She looked him up and down, taking in the obvious quality of everything he was wearing. The suit alone probably cost $1 million. His shoes were definitely Italian leather. That watch? Forget about it. More than I make in a year, she guessed. Try more than most people make in 5 years. The number shocked her. 5 years of her salary. For one outfit, she felt dizzy for a second, trying to wrap her head around that kind of money. But instead of backing down, something rebellious flared up inside her. Maybe it was the way he was looking at her, like she was something distasteful he'd stepped in. Maybe it was the whispers starting up around them, people pulling out phones to record her humiliation. Or maybe it was just 3 months of barely scraped together rent money and too many nights falling asleep to the sound of her stomach growling. "Well, congratulations," she said, her voice getting stronger. "You win the most expensive outfit ruined by clumsy waitress award. I'm sure they'll engrave your name on a golden coffee cup." His eyebrows shot up. Clearly, he wasn't used to people talking back to him. "Are you being sarcastic right now?" "Would I do that?" She tilted her head innocently. "To someone wearing a 5-year salary?" For just a second, just a flash, she thought she saw his mouth twitch, like he was fighting back a smile. But it was gone so fast she might have imagined it. "This is unbelievable," he muttered, looking down at his ruined suit. "This is a disaster." "Look," she said, her brief burst of attitude deflating as reality crashed back in. "I really am sorry. I know sorry doesn't fix your suit, but I tripped and save it." He pulled out his phone, probably calling his lawyer or his dry cleaner or whoever rich people called when their lives got inconvenienced. "Just save it." Jessamine was embarrassed. The entire cafe was still staring at them, phones recording, whispers getting louder. This was going to end up on social media within the hour. Clumsy waitress destroys rich guy's outfit would probably be trending by lunchtime. "I can pay for the cleaning," she offered weakly, even though they both knew she couldn't. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment she felt completely exposed, like he could see right through her bravado to the scared, broke girl underneath. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. But there was something in his voice that didn't match the threatening words. Something that sounded almost intrigued? Before she could figure out what that meant, he was walking away, leaving wet footprints on the cafe floor and the lingering scent of expensive cologne mixed with coffee. Jessamine stood there for a full minute, watching him go, her heart pounding against her ribs. The cafe slowly came back to life around her. Conversations resuming, phones being put away, the espresso machine humming back to work. "Girl, you are either the bravest or the stupidest person I've ever met," Ambrose said, appearing at her elbow with a towel to clean up the mess. "Probably both," she admitted, kneeling down to pick up the scattered coffee cups. But as she cleaned up the disaster, she couldn't stop thinking about those storm gray eyes and the way he'd looked at her. Not like she was invisible, the way most people looked at waitresses and janitors. "Get a grip," she told herself firmly. "Rich guys like that don't give girls like you a second thought. He probably forgot about you before you reached the door." She was wrong about that, though she wouldn't know it until the next day, when she walked into her new temp job and found herself face to face with the last person on earth she expected to see. The same storm gray eyes, the same impossibly expensive taste in suits, the same devastatingly handsome face that had been haunting her dreams, and a little gold nameplate on the office door that read, "Jericho Patton, CEO." Jessamine stared at the nameplate, then at the man behind the massive mahogany desk, then back at the nameplate. Her brain seemed to have short-circuited. No way. No freaking way. Jericho Patton, because apparently that was his name, looked up from whatever important CEO document he was reading. The moment their eyes met, his expression shifted from polite business interest to something between surprise and amusement. "Well," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "this is unexpected." "I can explain," Jessamine blurted out, even though she had no idea what she was going to explain. "I mean, I didn't know this was your company when I applied for the temp position. And I definitely didn't plan this. And—" "Breathe," he interrupted, and she realized she'd been babbling at lightning speed. "You're going to hyperventilate." She took a shaky breath, acutely aware that she was standing in what was probably the most expensive office she'd ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Abstract art hung on the walls, and everything was decorated in tasteful grays and blacks that screamed successful businessman. "Look," she started over, trying to sound professional. "Yesterday was an accident. A really, really expensive accident, but still an accident. I'm here for a job interview, not to cause more trouble." He studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes unreadable. She was wearing her one good outfit, a black skirt and white blouse she'd bought for her college graduation 3 years ago. Next to his perfectly tailored everything, she felt like she was playing dress-up in her mom's clothes. "Jessamine Pierce," he said, reading from a file on his desk. 25 years old, bachelor's degree in elementary education, currently working 2 part-time jobs to pay rent. The way he rattled off her life stats made her stomach clench. When it was written down like that, her existence sounded pretty pathetic. "That's me," she said, lifting her chin. "Professional coffee spiller and—" "Wait, how do you know all that? I make it my business to know about the people I might hire." He closed the file and looked at her again. "The question is, why do you want to work here? Because I need money and you're offering decent pay," she thought, but that didn't seem like the kind of answer that would get her hired. "I'm good with people," she said instead. "I'm organized, I learn fast, and I'm not afraid of hard work." "And you're not afraid of speaking your mind to authority figures," he added, and she couldn't tell if that was a good thing or a bad thing. "Sometimes," she admitted, "when the situation calls for it. Like when someone's being unreasonable about a coffee accident." Her cheeks turned red. "You were kind of being unreasonable. I was wearing a $10,000 suit, and I was working for $8 an hour plus tips." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but she was tired of apologizing for not being rich enough to understand his problems. Instead of getting angry, though, he smiled. Actually smiled, like she'd said something amusing rather than borderline insulting. "You know what?" he said, standing up from behind his desk. "You're hired." Jessamine blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "The temporary personal assistant position. It's yours." "But why? I literally destroyed your suit yesterday. Shouldn't you hate me?" He walked around the desk, stopping just close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Up close, she could see gold flecks in his gray eyes and smell that same expensive cologne from yesterday. "Most people who work for me are afraid to tell me the truth," he said. "They say what they think I want to hear, not what I need to hear. You, on the other hand, have no problem calling me out when you think I'm being unreasonable. So you're hiring me because I'm rude. I'm hiring you because you're honest. There's a difference." Jessamine looked around the luxurious office, then back at his face. This felt like a trap somehow, like there was a catch she wasn't seeing. "What exactly would I be doing as your personal assistant?" "Managing my calendar, screening calls, accompanying me to business events, making sure I don't miss important meetings." He paused. "And occasionally telling me when I'm being unreasonable about coffee accidents." Despite everything, she found herself fighting back a smile. "That last one might happen more often than you think." "I'm counting on it." The smart thing would be to walk away. This man was clearly way out of her league, and working closely with someone who made her pulse race just by looking at her was a recipe for disaster. But the smart thing wasn't going to pay her rent or put food in her refrigerator. "Okay," she said before she could change her mind. "I'll take the job." "Excellent. You start tomorrow. 8 a.m. sharp." 8 a.m.? She usually didn't get off her cleaning shift until 6 in the morning. "Could we maybe make it 9? He raised an eyebrow. "Are you negotiating with me already?" "I'm asking. There's a difference." This time, he definitely smiled. 8:30, final offer. Deal. As she turned to leave, he called her name. "Jessamine?" She looked back over her shoulder. Yeah? Wear something you don't mind getting dirty. We have a charity gala tomorrow night, and knowing your track record with beverages. Very funny, she shot back, but she was smiling as she walked out of his office. The next evening, Jessamine stood in front of her tiny bathroom mirror, trying to transform herself into someone who belonged at a charity gala. She'd managed to borrow a black cocktail dress from her roommate, a little too tight and a little too short. But it would have to do. Her hair was twisted up in what she hoped looked like an elegant bun, and she'd applied more makeup than she'd worn in her entire life. You can do this, she told herself. It's just one night. How hard can it be? Famous last words. The gala was being held at the city's fanciest hotel, the kind of place where the chandeliers hang high in the sky. Jessamine felt completely out of her element the moment she walked through the doors. Everyone looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. The women glittered in designer gowns and jewelry that caught the light with every movement. The men wore tuxedos that fit perfectly and probably hadn't come from the discount rack at Macy's. And then there was her, trying not to trip over her borrowed heels and hoping no one could tell her dress came from Target. You clean up well, a familiar voice said behind her. She turned to find Jericho approaching, and her breath caught in her throat. If she'd thought he looked good in a business suit, he was absolutely devastating in a tuxedo. The black jacket emphasized his broad shoulders, and the way he moved through the crowd suggested he was completely comfortable in this world of wealth and glamour. Thanks, she managed. You don't look terrible yourself. Such flattery. I'm overwhelmed. Despite her nerves, she laughed. I'm trying to be professional here. Professional doesn't mean boring. He offered her his arm. Shall we make the rounds? I need to schmooze some potential investors, and you need to learn how to navigate shark-infested waters. The next hour was a crash course in high society small talk. Jericho introduced her to what felt like hundreds of people, politicians, business owners, celebrities she recognized from magazines. Most of them were polite enough, but she caught the subtle once-overs, the raised eyebrows, the whispered conversations that stopped when she got too close. She was clearly the outsider here, and everyone knew it. Having fun yet? Jericho murmured as they moved away from a group of particularly snobbish socialites. Oh, absolutely. I love feeling like a zoo animal on display. They're just curious about you. I don't usually bring dates to these things. This isn't a date, she said quickly. This is work. Right, work. But the way he said it made her stomach flutter. She was reaching for a glass of champagne from a passing waiter when disaster struck again. Her heel caught in the long tablecloth of the nearby buffet table, and she stumbled forward, grabbing onto the first thing she could find for balance. Unfortunately, that first thing was a massive ice sculpture of a swan. She watched in slow-motion horror as the sculpture teetered, wobbled, and then crashed to the floor in a spectacular explosion of ice chunks and water. The entire ballroom fell silent. Jessamine stood frozen in the middle of the wreckage, ice water soaking her borrowed dress, staring at the remains of what had probably been a very expensive piece of art. Well, she said into the deafening quiet. At least it wasn't coffee this time. Someone in the crowd snorted with laughter, breaking the tension. Then, someone else chuckled, and within moments, the entire room was buzzing with amused conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, Jericho announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom, I'd like you to meet my assistant, Jessamine Pierce. As you can see, she has a very unique talent for making events memorable. More laughter rippled through the crowd, but this time it felt friendly rather than mocking. A waiter appeared with towels, and several people stopped by to joke about their own embarrassing moments at fancy parties. I can't believe you just did that, Jessamine whispered to Jericho as they made their way to a quiet corner. Did what? Made it seem like destroying expensive artwork was charming instead of catastrophic. He handed her his jacket to put over her wet dress. It was charming. You handled it with grace and humor. That's more than most of these people would manage. I'm pretty sure grace doesn't involve destroying ice sculptures. Trust me, that swan was hideous. You did everyone a favor. She looked up at him, this man who should have fired her on the spot but instead made her feel like she belonged in a world where she clearly didn't fit. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she asked. "Maybe I like having someone around who keeps life interesting." Before she could figure out what that meant, a woman's voice cut through their conversation like a blade. "Jericho, darling, aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" They turned to find a woman approaching them, tall, blonde, and absolutely stunning in the kind of effortless way that came from good genes and unlimited money. Her silver gown probably cost more than Jessamine's car, and she moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. But it was the look in her eyes when she focused on Jessamine that made alarm bells start ringing. Cold, calculating, and distinctly unfriendly. "Vivian," Jericho said, and Jessamine caught the subtle tension in his voice. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Daddy's company is one of the main sponsors," Vivian replied, her smile sharp as glass. She looked Jessamine up and down with barely concealed disdain. "And you are?" "Jessamine Pierce," Jessamine said, extending her hand. "I work with Jericho. Work with him." Vivian's laugh was like wind chimes in a tornado, pretty on the surface, but with an underlying harsh edge. "How quaint." She didn't shake Jessamine's outstretched hand. "Vivian is," Jericho started, "his ex-fiancée." Vivian finished smoothly, though I prefer to think of it as a temporary misunderstanding. Jessamine felt the full weight of the words. Ex-fiancée. This gorgeous, wealthy, perfectly polished woman had been engaged to marry Jericho. Had probably been planning their perfect life together in their perfect world, where nobody spilled coffee on expensive suits or destroyed ice sculptures. "Well," Jessamine said, forcing her voice to stay steady, "it was lovely to meet you, Vivian. I should probably go find some dry clothes." She started to walk away, but Vivian's voice followed her. "Do be careful, dear. These events can be so treacherous for people who aren't used to them." The warning was delivered with a sweet smile, but the threat underneath was crystal clear. As Jessamine made her way to the ladies' room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a very dangerous enemy. And worse, she couldn't stop thinking about the way Jericho had looked at Vivian. Not with love, exactly, but with a complicated history that made Jessamine's chest ache in ways she didn't want to analyze. "This is why you don't get involved with your boss," she reminded herself firmly, "especially when your boss comes with gorgeous ex-fiancés and a world you'll never understand." But as she caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror, hair falling down, makeup smudged, borrowed dress still damp from ice water, she couldn't help but wonder what it would feel like to truly belong in Jericho's world. And more dangerously, what it would feel like to belong with him. 3 weeks into working as Jericho's assistant, Jessamine had developed a routine. Coffee at 6 a.m., extra strong, because she was still pulling double duty with her cleaning job. Arrive at the office by 8:30 sharp, looking as professional as someone shopping at Target could manage. Spend the day managing Jericho's impossibly busy schedule, fielding calls from people whose names she recognized from Forbes magazine, and trying not to stare at her boss when he loosened his tie during late afternoon meetings. She was getting good at the job, surprisingly. The organizational skills she developed, juggling 2 part-time jobs and a shoestring budget, translated well to managing a CEO's chaos. And despite her fears, she hadn't spilled anything on anyone in almost a week. It was progress. "Jessamine, can you stay late tonight?" Jericho asked, emerging from his office as the rest of the staff filtered toward the elevators. "I need to finish the Morrison presentation, and I could use an extra pair of eyes." She glanced at the clock. 6:30 p.m. Her cleaning shift started at midnight, which gave her just enough time to grab dinner and maybe a power nap if they finished soon. "Sure," she said, saving the document she'd been working on. "What do you need me to do?" 2 hours later, they were still at it. Jericho had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms that were far too distracting for Jessamine's peace of mind. She'd kicked off her heels under her desk and was sitting cross-legged in her chair, laptop balanced on her knees, as she fact-checked his statistics. "These numbers don't make sense," she said, frowning at the screen. "You're projecting a 30% increase in revenue, but your market analysis suggests the industry is contracting." He looked up from his own laptop, hair falling across his forehead in a way that made her stomach flutter. "What do you suggest?" "Be honest about the challenges, but emphasize your competitive advantages. Don't promise growth you can't deliver. Promise stability in an unstable market." Jericho stared at her for a moment. "You know, most people would just tell me the numbers look fine. Most people probably understand business better than I do. I'm not so sure about that." He saved his work and closed the laptop. "You want some coffee? I'm going to make a fresh pot." "At this hour? Won't that keep you up all night?" "I don't sleep much anyway." Something in his voice made her look at him more closely. There were shadows under his eyes that she'd noticed getting darker over the past few days, a tension in his shoulders that suggested he carried more weight than just running a company. "Insomnia?" she asked gently. He shrugged, moving toward the small kitchen area off his office. "Occupational hazard. When you're responsible for 3,000 jobs and millions in revenue, your brain doesn't really shut off at bedtime." "That sounds lonely." The words slipped out before she could stop them, too personal for their professional relationship. But instead of shutting down, Jericho paused and scooping coffee grounds. "It is," he said quietly. "Most of the time." They were venturing into dangerous territory, the kind of honest conversation that could shift their entire dynamic. Jessamine knew she should steer back to safer subjects, but something about the late hour and the empty office made her brave. "Is that why you and Vivian broke up?" she asked. "The loneliness?" His hand stilled on the coffee maker. "That's a very personal question. Sorry. You don't have to." She wanted someone who would be home for dinner parties and charity galas, someone whose entire life revolved around the social calendar. He turned to face her, leaning against the counter. "I wanted someone who understood that sometimes changing the world requires missing a few dinner parties." And she didn't understand that? She understood it. She just didn't want to live with it. He ran a hand through his hair, messing it up even more. Vivian grew up in this world, surrounded by trust funds and country clubs, and people whose biggest concern is which charity event to attend on Saturday night. She wanted a husband who would fit seamlessly into that life. But that's not who you are. No. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt like he was seeing something in her face that she didn't even know was there. "That's not who I am." The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence between them. Jessamine felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that whatever she said next would either pull them back to safe ground or send them both tumbling into something far more complicated. "Who are you?" she asked. It was such a simple question, but the way his expression shifted told her it wasn't one many people had bothered to ask. "You want the honest answer or the corporate biography answer?" "Honest." He poured 2 cups of coffee, adding cream to hers, without asking how she liked it. The fact that he'd noticed and remembered such a small detail made her chest warm. "I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with my mom," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk instead of retreating to his own office. "My dad left when I was 8. Just disappeared one day. Mom worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table and still couldn't always make rent." Jessamine felt her heart clench. This was not the story she'd expected from someone who wore $1,000 suits and owned a corner office overlooking the city. "I was angry for a long time," he continued, staring into his coffee. "At my dad for leaving, at my mom for not being able to fix everything, at the world for being so unfair. That anger made me determined to never be powerless again. Never be the kid whose utilities got shut off, or who had to pretend he wasn't hungry at school. So you built all this." She gestured around the expensive office. "I built all this, and somewhere along the way, I forgot that success was supposed to make me happy, not just safe." The vulnerability in his voice made her throat tight. Here was this powerful, successful man admitting that all his wealth and status hadn't filled the empty spaces inside him. "What makes you happy?" she asked softly. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something flicker in his gray eyes. "I'm still figuring that out," he said. They sat in silence, drinking their coffee as the city lights twinkled beyond the windows. Jessamine found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the small scar near his left temple that she'd never noticed before. "What about you?" he asked suddenly. "What's your story?" "My story's not very interesting." "I doubt that." She curled her legs under her in the chair, suddenly self-conscious. "I grew up wanting to be a teacher. Had this whole plan. Get my degree. Find a job at an elementary school. Change the world one kid at a time. Very idealistic and naive. What happened? Life happened. My mom got sick my senior year of college. Cancer. The treatments were expensive, and insurance didn't cover everything. I graduated, but instead of applying for teaching jobs, I took whatever work I could find to help with medical bills." "Is she okay now?" Jessamyn's smile was sad around the edges. "She died 2 years ago, but not before racking up about $60,000 in medical debt that somehow became my responsibility." "Jesus, Jessamyn, I'm sorry." "It's fine. I mean, it's not fine, but it's life, you know. Sometimes you don't get the story you planned." She took a sip of coffee, using the moment to collect herself. "Anyway, that's why I'm here, instead of teaching third graders about fractions and the solar system." "Do you still want to teach?" The question caught her off guard. Most people assumed that working as someone's assistant meant she'd given up on her original dreams entirely. "Sometimes I think about it," she admitted, "but it's been 3 years. I'd probably need to take refresher courses, update my certification, and teacher salaries." She shrugged. "Let's just say they don't pay off medical debt very quickly. Money isn't everything. Easy to say when you have enough of it." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, and she immediately felt bad. He just opened up to her about his own difficult childhood, and here she was basically calling him privileged. "Sorry," she said quickly. "That was true." He finished. "It was true. I do have enough money now that I can afford to say it isn't everything. But I remember what it felt like when I didn't." He stood up, walking to the window that looked out over the city. From this height, the cars looked like toys and the people like ants. It was easy to forget, up here in this tower of success, that there were real struggles happening in all those lit windows below. "You know what I remember most about being poor?" he said, his back still turned to her. "The way people looked at me. Like I was less than, like my second-hand clothes and free lunch tickets meant I didn't matter as much as the kids whose parents drove BMWs. People still look at me like that." Jessamyn said quietly. He turned around. "Not everyone." "No," she agreed, meeting his eyes. "Not everyone." The air between them felt charged suddenly, like the moment before a thunderstorm when every hair on your body stands on end. Jessamyn was acutely aware of how alone they were, how intimate this conversation had become, how easy it would be to cross the space between them and see if he tasted as good as he looked. Instead, she glanced at the clock and forced herself back to reality. "It's almost 10, she said, standing up and slipping her feet back into her heels. "I should let you get home. What about you? Don't you need to get home too?" She thought about her studio apartment with its leaky faucet and noisy neighbors, then about the community center where she'd spend the next 6 hours mopping floors and emptying trash cans. "I've got a few more hours of work ahead of me," she said. His brow furrowed. "It's 10 o'clock at night." "Different job. I clean office buildings from midnight to 6. He stared at her. "You're working 2 full-time jobs?" "1.5, really. This is only 40 hours a week." "Jessamyn," he ran a hand through his hair. "That's insane." "When do you sleep?" "I manage." She gathered her purse and jacket, suddenly embarrassed by the reality of her life. Here she was, complaining about money to someone who could probably solve all her problems with his monthly coffee budget. "I should go." "Wait." He caught her arm gently as she passed his chair. The touch sent electricity shooting up to her shoulder. "Have dinner with me this weekend." Her heart stopped. "What? Dinner?" "Saturday night. There's this little Italian place I know. Nothing fancy, just good food and quiet conversation." Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was a terrible idea. He was her boss. He was rich and powerful and moved in circles where she'd never belong. He had a gorgeous ex-fiancée who clearly wasn't ready to let him go. Getting involved with him would be professional suicide and personal heartbreak all rolled into one. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said. "Why not?" "Because you're my boss." because we come from completely different worlds. Because this, she gestured between them, whatever this is, can only end badly. Maybe, he said, his thumb brushing across her wrist where he still held her arm, or maybe it could be something good. She looked down at his hand on her wrist, at the way her pulse was jumping under his touch, and felt her resolve wavering. One dinner, he said softly. Just two people getting to know each other better. No boss, no assistant, just Jericho and Jessamine. The way he said her name made her knees weak. She was in so much trouble. Okay, she whispered before she could talk herself out of it. One dinner. His smile was like sunrise. Saturday at 7, Saturday at 7. The next morning, Jessamine was sitting at her desk, trying to focus on emails, when she noticed something on her keyboard. A small piece of paper, folded into quarters, with her name written on it in Jericho's distinctive handwriting. She looked around the office, but he was in a meeting and wouldn't be out for another hour. Curious, she unfolded the paper. It was a napkin from the coffee shop down the street, and drawn on it in pen was a simple flower, just a few curved lines, but somehow delicate and beautiful. At the bottom, in small letters, he'd written, "Sometimes the simplest things are the most meaningful." Jessamine stared at the drawing, her chest filling with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It was such a small gesture, but it felt huge, like he'd seen something in her that was worth capturing, worth keeping. She pressed the napkin flat and slipped it into her purse, right next to her heart medication and her bus pass and all the other practical things that kept her life running. But somehow, this felt like the most important thing she was carrying. When Jericho emerged from his meeting 2 hours later, their eyes met across the office. He raised an eyebrow in question, and she touched her purse lightly, smiling. His answering grin made her feel like she was glowing from the inside out. This is dangerous, she thought. This is so dangerous. Saturday couldn't come fast enough, and yet when it arrived, Jessamine spent most of the day convinced she was making the biggest mistake of her life. She'd borrowed another dress from her roommate, navy blue this time, with a wrap style that was supposedly flattering on everyone. She'd spent an hour on her makeup and actually bought new shoes, which had put a serious dent in her grocery budget but felt necessary for what might be the most important dinner of her life. The Italian restaurant Jericho had chosen was perfect, small, and intimate, with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. Not the kind of place where she'd feel out of place, but nice enough that she knew he'd put thought into making her comfortable. He was already there when she arrived, standing up from a corner table as she walked in. He'd traded his usual business attire for dark jeans and a gray sweater that made his eyes look even more striking. Casual looked good on him, really good. "You look beautiful," he said, pulling out her chair. "Thank you. You look pretty good yourself." Dinner was perfect. That was the only word for it. They talked about books and movies and childhood memories. He told her about the time he'd tried to run away from home at age 10 and made it exactly 3 blocks before getting scared and going back. She told him about her disastrous attempt at learning to drive, which had ended with her father's car in a ditch and her grounded for a month. He laughed at her stories. Really laughed, head thrown back and eyes crinkled at the corners. She found herself leaning forward, drawn to the sound like a moth to flame. "You know what's funny?" he said over dessert. "I can negotiate million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but you make me nervous." "I make you nervous?" She nearly choked on her tiramisu. "You're kidding. Dead serious. You have this way of looking at me like you can see right through all the carefully constructed walls I've built. It's terrifying. Maybe because I know what it's like to build walls," she said softly. "Takes one to know one." He reached across the table and took her hand. "What are we doing, Jessamine?" "I have no idea," she admitted. "But I don't want to stop." The walk back to her apartment was slow, both of them reluctant for the evening to end. When they reached her building, a 4-story walk-up in a neighborhood that was politely called transitional, she expected him to say goodbye and call a cab. Instead, he walked her to the front door. "I had a really good time tonight," she said, suddenly shy. "So did I." He stepped closer, and she could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Can I see you again? Outside of work, I mean." "Jericho!" She wanted to say yes so badly it hurt, but reality was crashing back in. This is complicated. The best things usually are. He leaned down, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was soft, tentative, asking permission rather than taking. She melted into it, her hands fisting in his sweater as 3 years of loneliness and careful self-protection crumbled in the space of a heartbeat. When they broke apart, she was breathing hard. "Complicated," she repeated weakly. "Very," he agreed, but he was smiling. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and secret smiles. Their relationship at work remained professional, but underneath the surface, everything had changed. He'd brush past her desk just to be close. She'd linger in his office longer than necessary, making excuses to stay and talk. It was dangerous and exciting and absolutely addictive. They had lunch together twice, dinner once more, and one perfect Saturday afternoon spent walking through the park, talking about everything and nothing. She was falling for him, had already fallen, if she was being honest, and the look in his eyes suggested he felt the same way, which made what happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon so much more devastating. Jessamine was on her way back from lunch when she heard voices coming from the break room. She wouldn't have paid attention, except she caught her own name. "Can't believe Jericho's actually sleeping with the help." She froze in the hallway, her stomach dropping. "I mean, she's pretty enough, I suppose." Another voice said, "But really? A waitress? He could have anyone." "Mark my words, she'll be gone within a month. Rich guys like him don't keep girls like her around long term. She's just his latest plaything." God, imagine being that desperate. Throwing yourself at your boss just to keep a job. The cruel laughter that followed broke her. Jessamine stood in the hallway, shaking, as the conversation continued. "I heard she's working 2 jobs just to make rent. Probably sees dollar signs every time she looks at him. Can you blame her? If I was that broke, I might consider it too. She's basically a prostitute with a business degree." The words hit her like a slap. She pressed her back against the wall, fighting the urge to throw up. These people, Jericho's employees, people she worked with every day, thought she was using him for money. Thought she was some kind of gold digger who'd sleep her way to financial security. Worse, they were talking about it so casually, like it was obvious to everyone but her and Jericho. She made it to the bathroom just in time to lose her lunch. For the rest of the day, she moved through her tasks like a robot, hyper-aware of every look, every whispered conversation that stopped when she entered a room. Had people always been talking about her this way? Had she been so blinded by her feelings for Jericho that she'd missed the obvious? By 5 o'clock, she felt like she was drowning. "You okay?" Jericho appeared at her desk as the office emptied out. "You seem quiet today." "Fine," she managed, not trusting herself to say more. "Want to grab dinner? There's this new Thai place." "I can't." She kept her eyes on her computer screen, afraid that if she looked at him, she'd start crying. "I have to work." "Jessamine." His voice was gentle. "Look at me." She finally raised her eyes to his and saw her pain reflected in his concerned expression. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Everything," she thought. "I'm in love with you, and everyone thinks I'm a whore." "Nothing," she said instead. "I'm just tired." He didn't believe her. She could see it in his face, but he didn't push. "Get some rest tonight, okay? We'll talk tomorrow." That evening, Jessamine sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the napkin with the flower drawing that she'd taped to her bathroom mirror. Such a simple thing, but it had made her feel special, seen. Like maybe she could be worthy of someone like Jericho Patton. Now it just reminded her of how naive she'd been. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. "Sweet dreams. Can't wait to see you tomorrow." She stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. The next morning, Jessamine arrived at work determined to be professional and distant. She'd spent most of the night convincing herself that what they had was just a fantasy anyway, a rich man's temporary fascination with someone from a different world, and a poor girl's desperate grab at a fairy tale that was never meant for her. She made it exactly 3 hours before everything fell apart. She was delivering files to Jericho's office when she overheard him on a phone call. The door was slightly ajar, and his assistant's desk was empty, so she knocked softly and entered when he waved her in. "No, it looks bad," he was saying into his Bluetooth headset, his back to her as he stared out the window. "But it's temporary. A few more weeks, and it'll run its course." Jessamine froze halfway to his desk. "Of course I'm being careful," he continued. "I'm not stupid, Robert. I know what's at stake here. My reputation, the company's reputation. I'm not going to let some little waitress destroy what I've built." The files slipped from her hands, scattering across the floor. Jericho spun around, his face going white when he saw her standing there. "I have to call you back," he said quickly, ending the call. "Jessamine, some little waitress?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "Is that what I am to you? You don't understand. That was my lawyer, and he was—" "Your lawyer?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, God, this is worse than I thought. Are you worried I'm going to sue you for sexual harassment? Or are you just making sure you're covered when you fire me for sleeping with you?" "That's not." He ran his hands through his hair, looking panicked. "It's not what you think." Robert was concerned about appearances, and I was just reassuring him that it's temporary, that it'll run its course. She felt numb, like her body was shutting down to protect her from the pain. "How long did you plan to keep me around? Until you got bored? Until something better came along? Jessamine, please, let me explain." But she was already backing toward the door. "You know what the really pathetic part is? I actually thought you were different. I thought you saw something in me worth caring about." "I do see that." "You mean—" "I mean nothing." The words came out louder than she'd intended, sharp with pain. "I'm just your experiment, right? The poor girl you keep around for laughs? Something to make you feel better about yourself before you go back to your real life with people like Vivian? That's not fair." "Fair?" She laughed again, the sound brittle and broken. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would be you being honest instead of letting me make a fool of myself. Fair would be you treating me like a person instead of a temporary distraction." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Don't go," he said quietly. "Please, we can work this out." She looked back at him, this man who'd made her feel beautiful and special and worthy, who'd turned out to be just like everyone else who looked at her and saw only her circumstances, not her heart. "There's nothing to work out," she said. "I quit." And then she was gone, leaving him standing alone in his expensive office, with scattered papers at his feet, and the taste of regret bitter on his tongue. Jessamine made it exactly 2 blocks before the tears started. By the time she reached the coffee shop where it all began, she was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. She found an empty table in the corner and let herself fall apart. 3 years of carefully controlled emotions, of staying strong through her mother's death and the crushing debt and the exhaustion of working multiple jobs just to survive. All of it came pouring out in ugly, gasping sobs that she couldn't stop. "Excuse me," a gentle voice said. "Are you all right?" She looked up through tear-blurred eyes to see an elderly woman at the next table, her face kind and concerned. "I'm fine," Jessamine managed, wiping her face with a napkin. "Sorry for disturbing you." "Honey, you don't disturb someone by having feelings. Whoever hurt you, they're not worth your tears." If only it were that simple, Jessamine thought, but she managed a watery smile for the kind stranger. "Thank you," she said. "Take care of yourself, dear. And remember, the right person will love you exactly as you are, not as who they think you should be." After the woman left, Jessamine sat alone with her coffee and her broken heart, wondering how she'd been stupid enough to believe that love could bridge the gap between their worlds. Her phone buzzed with another text from Jericho. "Please come back." "Let me explain." She turned off her phone without reading any further messages. Some mistakes, she thought, you only make once. For 3 days, Jessamine ignored Jericho's calls. She'd blocked his number after the 15th voicemail, but he was persistent, calling from different numbers, having flowers delivered to her apartment, even showing up at the community center where she worked her cleaning job. She managed to avoid him there by hiding in the supply closet until her supervisor told her he'd finally left. Pathetic, she thought, crouched behind boxes of toilet paper and disinfectant, hiding from your ex-boss like some kind of criminal. But seeing him would mean facing the humiliation all over again. The way he'd talked about her, like she was a problem to be managed. A temporary inconvenience that would run its course. The casual dismissal of her as some little waitress. As if 3 years of college and her dreams of teaching meant nothing. On Thursday morning, she was leaving her apartment for a job interview when she found him sitting on the front steps of her building. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was messy. His expensive suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it, and there were dark circles under his eyes that matched her own. "We need to talk," he said, standing up as she approached. "No, we don't." She tried to walk around him, but he stepped into her path. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I'm late for a job interview. Then I'll drive you. We can talk on the way. She almost laughed. You think I'm getting in a car with you? Jessamine, please. The desperation in his voice made her pause. I know you hate me right now, and you have every right to, but I need you to know the truth. Against her better judgment, she looked at his face. Really looked at him. The man standing in front of her didn't look like the confident CEO she'd fallen for. He looked broken, lost, like he hadn't slept or eaten in days. 5 minutes, she said finally. That's it. They sat on a bench at the bus stop, maintaining careful distance between them. Jessamine kept her eyes on the street, watching for her bus and trying to ignore the familiar scent of his cologne. That phone call, he began. It wasn't what you think, really, because it sounded pretty clear to me. Robert, my lawyer, he was worried about a potential scandal. Some photos from the charity gala ended up in a gossip blog. Pictures of us together. He wanted to make sure I knew how to handle any media attention. Despite herself, Jessamine felt a flicker of interest. What did you tell him? That he could go to hell if he thought I was going to hide my relationship with you to protect my image. She finally looked at him. That's not what I heard. Because you only heard half the conversation. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. Right before you walked in, he suggested I should end things with you quietly. Let the story die down. That's when I told him it was temporary. His concern, not our relationship. I told him a few weeks and people would find something else to gossip about. The explanation made sense, but Jessamine had been hurt too deeply to accept it easily. And the comment about some little waitress? Jericho's face flushed with shame. That was me being angry and defensive. He kept implying that you were somehow beneath me, and I got pissed off and threw his words back at him. I was trying to make a point about how ridiculous his concerns were, but I said it all wrong. So you were defending me by insulting me? I was defending us by pointing out how stupid his prejudices were, but yes, I said it badly. Really, really badly. Jessamine's bus appeared in the distance, and she felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. This conversation was heading somewhere dangerous, somewhere that might make her hope again. I have to go, she said, standing up. Don't take the job, he said suddenly. What? Whatever job you're interviewing for, don't take it. Come back and work for me. She stared at him. Are you insane? After everything that's happened, you want me to come back and be your assistant? Not my assistant. He stood up too, moving closer. My partner. Help me run the company. You're brilliant at this, Jessamine. You see problems I miss. Ask questions that make me think differently. You make me better at everything. Jericho, I'm in love with you. The words shocked her. Her bus pulled up to the curb, doors opening with a mechanical wheeze. But she couldn't move. I know I screwed up, he continued, his voice rushed and desperate. I know I hurt you, and I know you have every reason not to trust me. But I'm in love with you, and I hope, you might feel the same way about me. The bus driver honked impatiently. Other passengers were boarding, shooting curious looks at the drama playing out on the sidewalk. You coming or not, lady? The driver called. Jessamine looked at the bus, then at Jericho's face. Those gray eyes that had haunted her dreams, full of hope and fear, and something that looked an awful lot like love. I can't, she whispered. I can't do this again. She got on the bus. The job interview was a disaster. Jessamine's mind was completely elsewhere, replaying Jericho's words over and over. I'm in love with you. the sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes. But love wasn't enough, was it? Love didn't bridge the gap between their worlds. Love didn't stop people from gossiping or make her belong in boardrooms and charity galas. She was walking home, lost in thought, when she noticed the black sedan following her. At first she thought she was being paranoid, but after 3 turns, it was still there. Then she saw the camera lens poking out of the passenger window. Paparazzi. Her heart started racing. She ducked into a corner store, pretending to browse magazines while watching through the window. The sedan parked across the street, and she could see at least 2 people inside with professional cameras. This is what Jericho's lawyer was worried about. She realized, this is what my life becomes if I'm with him. She called an Uber from the back of the store and gave the driver her sister's address instead of her own. But even there, she didn't feel safe. What if they followed her? What if they bothered her family? That evening, her sister Maya found her staring out the window, watching for suspicious cars. "Okay, spill," Maya said, settling onto the couch beside her. "What's going on? You show up here looking like you've seen a ghost. You keep checking the windows, and you've been clutching your phone like it's going to explode." Jessamine told her everything: the job, the relationship, the fight, the photographers. Maya listened without interruption, occasionally making sympathetic noises or muttering curses about rich men who didn't know how good they had it. "So he says he loves you," Maya said when Jessamine finished. "What did you say back?" "I got on a bus." Classic Jess. Run away from anything that might make you happy. That's not fair, isn't it? Maya turned to face her fully. You've been miserable for 3 years, working yourself to death, convinced you don't deserve anything good. Then this guy comes along. This guy comes along and makes me feel like maybe I could have something better, then reminds me exactly why I can't. Or maybe he makes a mistake, a big one, I'll grant you, and then tries to fix it by telling you he loves you. Jessamine felt tears threatening again. It doesn't matter how he feels. We're from completely different worlds. You should see the way people look at me at his office, Maya. They think I'm using him. They think I'm some kind of gold digger who's sleeping with the boss to pay off her debts. And what does he think? I don't know anymore. Maya was quiet for a moment, then got up and went into her bedroom. She came back with a photo album, their old family pictures. Remember this? She opened to a page showing 8-year-old Jessamine in a school play, dressed as a sunflower and grinning with several missing teeth. The spring pageant. I played the part of Hope. You were so proud of that costume Mom made you. It was basically a bedsheet with yellow fabric glued on, but you thought you looked like a princess. What's your point? My point is that little girl didn't care that her costume wasn't as fancy as everyone else's. She didn't care that we couldn't afford the store-bought costumes, or that Dad had to work 2 jobs to pay for the school supplies. She knew she belonged on that stage just as much as anyone else. Jessamine stared at the photo, remembering how confident and happy she'd felt that day. What happened to her? Maya asked softly. What happened to the girl who believed she deserved to shine? Before Jessamine could answer, her phone rang. Unknown number, but by now she recognized the pattern. "It's him," she said. "Answer it." "Maya." "Answer it, Jess. Stop running away from the possibility of being happy." With shaking hands, Jessamine accepted the call. "Don't hang up," Jericho's voice said immediately. "Please, just listen." "I'm listening. I know about the photographers. I've had my security team deal with them. They won't bother you again. And I know this is my fault. I should have been more careful, should have anticipated this might happen. It's not just about the photographers, Jericho. I know. It's about trust. It's about me failing you when you needed me to have your back." His voice was rough with emotion. "It's about me being too much of a coward to stand up to my lawyer and tell him that you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and anyone who has a problem with that can kiss my ass." Despite everything, Jessamine felt her mouth twitch with the beginning of a smile. "You said that to your lawyer?" "I fired him. Hired a new one who understands that you're not going anywhere." "I'm not going anywhere because I'm not coming back. Yet," he said. "You're not coming back yet, but I'm not giving up on us, Jessamine. I can't. You want to know why?" She didn't answer, but she didn't hang up either. Because for the first time in my life, I know what it feels like to be happy. Not successful, not secure, not accomplished. Happy. And it's because of you. Because you see me, not my bank account or my business or my reputation. You see me, and somehow you like what you see. Tears were rolling down her cheeks now. Maya squeezed her hand encouragingly. You make me want to be the man you think I am, he continued. You make me want to deserve you. And maybe I don't. Maybe I never will, but I'd like the chance to try. Jericho. She closed her eyes, feeling herself letting go. I love you, he said simply. I love your laugh and your stubbornness, and the way you're not impressed by anything that usually impresses people. I love how you care about everyone except yourself, and I love how you make me want to be better than I ever thought I could be. This is crazy, she whispered. Probably. But the best things usually are, right? Jessamine looked at Maya, who was grinning and giving her enthusiastic thumbs up. Then she looked at the photo of her 8-year-old self, confident and radiant in her homemade sunflower costume. What happened to the girl who believed she deserved to shine? Maybe it was time to find out. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll come back. But not as your assistant, and not as your partner in the business. I'll come back as me, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. The relief in his voice was audible. We'll figure it out, I promise. After they hung up, Maya hugged her tightly. I'm proud of you, her sister said. Mom would be too. I hope so, Jessamine replied. I really, really hope so. 6 months later, Jessamine stood in front of the bathroom mirror in Jericho's sweet apartment, trying to decide if the emerald green dress made her look sophisticated, or like she was playing dress-up. You look stunning, Jericho said from the doorway, adjusting his bow tie. Stop overthinking it. Easy for you to say. You were born for black tie events. Actually, I was born for a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. The black tie thing is learned behavior. She turned to face him, still amazed by how handsome he looked in a tuxedo. 6 months of being together hadn't diminished the effect he had on her. If anything, it had gotten stronger. Ready for this? He asked, offering her his arm. Tonight was the annual Children's Literacy Foundation Gala, and Jessamine wasn't just attending as Jericho's girlfriend. She was being honored as the foundation's newest board member, a position that came with both significant responsibility and the resources to finally pursue her dream of improving education for underprivileged kids. I'm terrified, she admitted. Good. That means it matters to you. The ballroom was even more elegant than the charity gala where she'd destroyed the ice sculpture. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow reflections across the walls, and every table was decorated with elaborate floral arrangements that probably cost more than her old monthly rent. But this time, Jessamine didn't feel like she was wearing a costume. The dress had been a gift from Jericho, not because he thought she needed him to buy her clothes, but because he wanted her to have something beautiful for such an important night. And more importantly, she felt like she belonged here, not because of who she was dating, but because of the work she was doing. Miss Pierce, a woman approached their table. I'm Sandra Martinez from the Times. Could I ask you a few questions about your literacy program? 6 months ago, the idea of being interviewed by a newspaper would have terrified her. Now she smiled confidently. Of course, your pilot program has shown remarkable success rates. What do you think makes it different from other reading intervention programs? We're not just teaching kids to read, Jessamine explained. We're showing them that books can be mirrors and windows, mirrors that reflect their own experiences, and windows into worlds they might not have imagined for themselves. When children see themselves represented in stories, they're more likely to see reading as relevant to their lives. And the funding for expansion? Thanks to the generosity of our donors and partners, we'll be able to implement the program in 15 schools next year, reaching over 3,000 children. As she talked about the work, Jessamine felt the familiar spark of passion that had drawn her to teaching in the first place. This was what she was meant to do, not managing calendars or screening calls, but helping kids discover the magic of learning. One more question, the reporter said. There's been some speculation about your relationship with Jericho Patton affecting your position on the board. How do you respond to that? Jessamine had been waiting for this question for months. Early in their relationship, there had been gossip blogs and social media speculation about her motivations. Some people still whispered that she was using him for his money and connections. She'd learned to address it head on. "I understand why people might have questions," she said calmly, "but my qualifications speak for themselves. I have a degree in education, 3 years of experience working with at-risk communities, and a pilot program with documented results. I was offered this position based on merit, not my personal relationships." "And what do you say to critics who suggest you're just another gold digger?" Jessamine felt Jericho tense beside her, but she touched his arm gently. She could handle this herself. "I say they clearly don't know me very well," she replied with a slight smile. "I was working 2 jobs and supporting myself long before I met Jericho, and I'd continue to do meaningful work with or without him. Love doesn't diminish a woman's accomplishments. It can actually make them stronger." After the reporter left, Jericho squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you," he said. "For what?" "For being exactly who you are, no matter who's watching." The evening continued with dinner, speeches, and an auction that raised over $2 million for children's literacy programs. Jessamine found herself genuinely enjoying the conversations, no longer intimidated by the wealth and status around her. She was talking to a group of teachers about classroom resources when she noticed a familiar figure approaching their table. Vivian, looking impeccable in a silver gown. "Jessamine," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How lovely to see you again. Vivian, I didn't know you were interested in children's literacy." "Oh, I'm interested in many charitable causes. It's so important to give back, don't you think?" Vivian's tone was perfectly pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "Though I must say I was surprised to hear about your board position. It's quite a leap from cleaning office buildings to overseeing educational programs." The insult was delivered so smoothly that it almost sounded like a compliment. A year ago, Jessamine might have been hurt or intimidated. Now she just felt sad for someone who measured worth by social status. "It is quite a leap," she agreed. "But that's the beautiful thing about education. It can take you places you never imagined possible." "Indeed. Well, I suppose we all find our level eventually." "We do," Jessamine said pleasantly. "Some of us just aim higher than others." Vivian's smile faltered slightly. Before she could respond, Jericho appeared at Jessamine's side. "Vivian," he said coolly, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Darling, you know I support worthy causes." She looked between them, her expression calculating. "You two look very cozy. I suppose congratulations are in order?" "Actually," Jericho said, his arm tightening around Jessamine's waist, "they are." He stepped away from Jessamine and, to her complete shock, dropped to one knee in the middle of the crowded ballroom. The entire room went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned in their direction. "Jericho," Jessamine whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What are you doing?" "Something I should have done months ago," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Jessamine Pierce, you changed my life the day you spilled coffee on my suit. You made me remember what it feels like to be human instead of just successful." Tears were already blurring her vision, but she could see the love shining in his gray eyes. "You challenge me, inspire me, and make me want to be worthy of the way you see me. You're the strongest, most compassionate person I know, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." He opened the box, revealing a ring that wasn't the biggest or flashiest diamond in the world, but was absolutely perfect, elegant and classic, with a vintage setting that looked like something with history and meaning. "Will you marry me?" The ballroom was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Hundreds of people were watching, waiting for her answer. Cameras were flashing, phones were recording, and she knew this moment would probably be all over social media within minutes. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was the man kneeling in front of her, looking at her like she was his entire world. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." The ballroom erupted in applause and cheers. Jericho slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood and kissed her as if his life depended on it. She melted into him, vaguely aware of the celebration happening around them, but completely focused on the feeling of his lips on hers and the solid warmth of his arms around her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, She saw Vivian's expression in her peripheral vision, shocked, angry, and finally, definitively defeated. "I love you," Jericho murmured against her ear, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Even if you are completely insane for proposing to me in front of 300 people." "I wanted everyone to know," he said, pulling back to look at her face. "I wanted the whole world to know that you're mine and I'm yours. And I'm not hiding it or apologizing for it, or letting anyone make you feel like you don't belong." Tears spilled over and ran down her cheeks. "You're going to make me ruin my makeup. You're beautiful with or without makeup," he said, wiping her tears with his thumbs. "You're beautiful, period." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, champagne toasts, and more photos than Jessamine had ever taken in her life. By the time they made it back to Jericho's apartment, she was exhausted but happier than she'd ever been. "So," she said, collapsing onto his couch and kicking off her heels. "That happened! That happened!" he agreed, loosening his bow tie and sitting beside her. "Any regrets?" She looked down at the ring sparkling on her finger, then at the man who'd just turned her entire world upside down in the most beautiful way possible. "Just one," she said. His face fell slightly. "What?" "I regret not saying yes faster." His smile was radiant. "We have the rest of our lives for me to ask you questions, and you to say yes." "Is that a threat or a promise?" "Both." 1 year later. "Stop fidgeting," Maya said, adjusting Jessamine's veil for the 100th time. "You look perfect." Jessamine stared at herself in the full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, flowing ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves and a train that would make her feel like a princess walking down the aisle. Her hair was swept up in a romantic chignon with small white flowers woven throughout. But it wasn't the dress or the flowers or the professional makeup that made her look different. It was the confidence in her eyes, the contentment in her smile, the glow of a woman who knew exactly where she belonged. "I can't believe this is really happening," she murmured. "Believe it," Maya said, squeezing her shoulders. "You deserve every bit of happiness coming your way." Through the window of the bridal suite, Jessamine could see the garden where the ceremony would take place in 20 minutes. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, an archway covered in roses and greenery, and a small group of their closest friends and family members taking their seats. It wasn't the massive society wedding that someone like Jericho could have had. There were no photographers from town and country, no celebrity guests, no 5-course meal that cost more than most people's cars. Instead, they'd chosen something intimate and personal, exactly what both of them wanted. "The literacy program expansion got approved," Jessamine said suddenly. Maya laughed. "Only you would be thinking about work on your wedding day." "It's not work, it's my purpose." She smoothed her dress and took a deep breath. 50 schools, Maya. We're going to reach 10,000 kids next year. I'm proud of you, Jess." "Mom would be too." The mention of their mother sent a bittersweet pang through Jessamine's chest. She'd left an empty chair in the front row with a white rose, honoring the woman who'd taught her to be strong and kind and never give up on her dreams. "She would have liked him," Jessamine said softly. "She would have loved him," Maya corrected, "because he makes you happy, and that's all she ever wanted for us." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Ladies, it's time," the wedding coordinator called. Jessamine's heart started racing. After everything they'd been through, all the obstacles and misunderstandings and moments when it seemed impossible that they could make it work, she was about to marry the love of her life. "Ready?" Maya asked, handing her the bouquet of white roses and greenery. Ready. The walk down the aisle felt like a dream. She was vaguely aware of the music, the smiling faces of their guests, the photographer capturing every moment. But all she could really see was Jericho waiting for her at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in his black tuxedo and more nervous than she'd ever seen him. When their eyes met, his entire face lit up with a smile that took her breath away. Her father walked her to the front and placed her hand in Jericho's with a whispered, "Take care of her." "I will," Jericho promised, his voice thick with emotion. "For the rest of my life." The ceremony itself was a blur of vows and rings, and the sound of their friends and family celebrating their love. But Jessamine would always remember the moment when Jericho reached into his pocket and pulled out a familiar piece of paper. "I wrote traditional vows," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the garden air. "But then I realized they weren't really us. We didn't have a traditional beginning, and I don't think we'll have a traditional marriage either." He unfolded the paper, and Jessamine gasped. It was the napkin from their first day working together, the one with the simple flower drawing that she'd kept in her purse for months. "You gave me this on the day I realized I was falling in love with you," he said, his gray eyes locked on hers. "It's just a flower drawn on a napkin, but it represents something beautiful growing from the simplest beginnings." Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "Jessamine, you teach me every day that the most precious things in life aren't expensive. They're meaningful. You are the most meaningful thing in my world, and I promise to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you matter." When it was her turn, Jessamine had thrown out her own carefully written vows. "Jericho," she began, her voice steady despite her tears, "you asked me once what makes me happy. The answer is you. Not your money or your success or your ability to solve my problems. Just you, the man who draws flowers on napkins and remembers how I like my coffee and makes me believe I can change the world." She took a shaky breath, looking out at the faces of everyone they loved, then back at him. "I promise to challenge you when you're being unreasonable, support you when you're struggling, and love you through whatever comes next. And I promise never to spill coffee on you again." The crowd laughed, breaking the emotional tension for a moment. "Unless you really deserve it," she added with a grin, making everyone laugh even harder. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Jericho's kiss was everything she dreamed it would be, passionate and tender and full of promises for their future together. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, rice and flower petals raining down on them, Jessamine caught sight of someone unexpected in the crowd. Ambrose, from the coffee shop, grinning and applauding with the rest of their guests. "You invited Ambrose?" she whispered to Jericho. "He's the one who hired you at the cafe." Jericho whispered back, "If he hadn't given you that job, you never would have been there to spill coffee on me. So this is all his fault? The best mistake of my life." 6 months later, Jericho Patton, "If you burn the toast again, I'm making you eat cereal for breakfast for the rest of the month," Jessamine called from the bathroom, where she was getting ready for work. "It's not burned," he called back. "It's well toasted." She emerged from the bathroom to find their kitchen filled with smoke and her husband standing over the toaster with a sheepish expression. "It's burned," she said, kissing his cheek and opening windows to clear the air. "Maybe a little. Maybe a lot." She grabbed the bread and started making fresh toast. "How did you become a successful businessman when you can't even operate basic kitchen appliances? I have people for that. You have me for that. There's a difference." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, nuzzling her neck. "Much more fun having you." She leaned back against his chest, still amazed by how perfectly they fit together. Marriage had been an adjustment, learning to share space and make decisions together, and navigate the complex balance between their very different backgrounds. But every challenge had only made them stronger. "Speaking of having me," she said, turning in his arms, "I have some news. Good news or bad news? That depends on how you feel about sleepless nights and diaper changes." It took him a moment to process her words. When understanding dawned, his face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and finally, pure joy. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying you're going to be a dad." She pulled the positive pregnancy test from her pocket, grinning at his stunned expression. "Surprise?" He stared at the test, then at her face, then back at the test. "We're having a baby," he said, like he was testing how the words sounded. "We're having a baby," she confirmed. He kissed her then, spinning her around their sunny kitchen with its slightly burned smell and their wedding photos in the refrigerator, and the coffee maker that got a workout every morning. When he finally set her down, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. "I love you, Mrs. Patton," he said, his forehead pressed against hers. "I love you too, Mr. Patton, even when you burn the toast." "At least I didn't spill coffee this time," she laughed, thinking about how far they'd come from that chaotic morning in the cafe. when her clumsiness had changed both their lives forever. "You know what?" she said, reaching for her travel mug. "I think I owe that coffee spill a thank you card." The best disasters usually become the best love stories. As they headed out to start another day, him to his office, her to the community center where she now ran the expanded literacy program, Jessamine reflected on the strange, wonderful journey that had brought them here. A year and a half ago, she'd been a struggling waitress convinced that bad luck followed her everywhere she went. Now she was a married woman with meaningful work, a baby on the way, and a love story that had started with disaster and turned into something beautiful. Sometimes the best things in life really did begin with spilled coffee and ruined suits. Sometimes the people who seemed completely wrong for you turned out to be exactly what you needed. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, love really could bridge any gap between rich and poor, powerful and powerless, different worlds that weren't so different after all. From spilled coffee to true love, what would you have done if you were Jessamine? Every love story begins with a single moment when everything changes. Sometimes it's a glance across a crowded room. Sometimes it's a perfectly timed coincidence. And sometimes it's hot coffee splashed across an expensive suit and the courage to see past first impressions to find something real. The greatest love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other. They're about imperfect people choosing to grow together. About mistakes that become miracles, disasters that become destinies, and the beautiful chaos of two lives becoming one. Because, in the end, it's not about the coffee you spill. It's about the person who helps you clean up the mess and chooses to stay anyway.